So the first talk will be by Michele Riva with the name Multi-Tenant Next.js at any scale. So please welcome Michele. Hey, Michele, welcome. How are you?
Hello. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Also good. Really looking forward to your talk. As I see, it's like yeah, it sounds pretty epic because it's like a lot about a huge scale and streaming of the video, as if I can presume at scale on the web. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Will this also include stuff like some native APIs, like some WebRTC and stuff like that?
We will actually be using Next.js and Express.js or Fastify or whatever you want, because I will be explaining a concept rather than a technology.
Perfect. So that sounds even more accessible to everyone involved. So let's just hop straight into them. Really curious.
Thank you. So, hello everyone, and welcome to my talk, Multi-Tenant Next.js at any scale. Before we start, let me present myself for a moment. I am Michele Riva. I'm working as a senior software engineer at Viacom CBS. And for those who don't know what Viacom CBS is, it's a merger between two big corporates, Viacom and the CBS corporations. And I'm also book author for Packet, and I'm writing the real-world Next.js book, which will be published by the end of this year. And I need to go back to Viacom CBS for a moment, because everything that I've been talking about today is the product of my researches at Viacom CBS. You have to know that Viacom CBS has many, many brands. And here we can see just a few of them. CBS, Paramount, MTV, Comedy Central, or Channel 5 are just to name a few of them. And with many different brands and many different websites that can actually share some features, the concept of multi-tenancy can actually be really, really interesting. So let's move on and let's ask ourselves, what is multi-tenancy? Well, before we start talking about multi-tenancy, we should start by understanding what is not multi-tenancy. So let's take this as an example. Let's take 4 different Viacom CBS brands that are Comedy Central, Paramount, Nickelodeon, and MTV. We will be using those services, those websites as an example, but you can imagine that we are using more of them, like Channel 5 or Bill.Letter or other websites, of course. But we will be concentrating on those 4 for the moment. So this is a very simple single-tenant architecture. We have the first user that wants to see something on Comedy Central. So she makes a request to Comedy Central. And then there is a web server that could be Ruby on Rails web server. It could be a Spring Boot, Elixir Phoenix, or a Node.js Express web server, taking the data from some external data source, like a database or a GraphQL API or something like that. And then we render the result and send it back to the final user. Then there is a second user that wants to see Titanic on Paramount and makes a request to paramountnetwork.com. And there can be another different web server, such as Ruby on Rails again, or maybe something completely different, such as Laravel on PHP, taking the request and asking for data, and then rendering the page and sending it back to the user. And the same approach can be taken for all the website for our brands. So every single brand can have its own tech stack, its own database or data source, and so on. So basically, every single website is logically and physically separated from the others. So multi-tenancy takes the approach, the opposite approach. So we will have just one big web server taking all the incoming requests, and then if we have separate databases, the reasoning will be the following one. The first user asks for, let's say, South Park, because she wants to see something, some South Park episodes, and she will make a request to Comedy Central. There will be a web server taking the request, and let's say this is an Express.js web server. the web server will make a request to the database or the data source, will render the page and send it back to the user. Then, when the second user comes, he will ask for Titanic on Paramount. So Paramount will take the data and send it back to the user. Fact is, they are both served by the exact same server, the exact same web server. So we do not have a lot of web servers, like one server per website, but just one big web server for every single website. If we have two websites, we will be serving two websites from one server. If we have 1,000 websites, we will be serving 1,000 websites from one single server. And as you can see here, we have separate databases, but there's also another architecture, which is called single database, separate schemas, where we actually use just one single database and just separate the schemas inside of it, but the concept is still the same. We have one big web server taking all the incoming requests, and depending on the host name that is making the request, we'll be taking the data and rendering the pages conditionally. There's also another approach, which is a bit more modern, and it's instance replication via Kubernetes, Swarm, or any other orchestrator. At this point, we will have a Kubernetes cluster with a reverse proxy, and then we will have a single pod for every single website, but we will be writing the code only once. So the code that is serving the Comedy Central web server will be the exact same code that will be serving the Paramount Network web server. And the same applies for Nickelodeon, MTV, and so on. So we write the code only once, and then we replicate it for balancing the load between all our services. So what are the advantages of such a solution? Well, the multi-tenant architecture actually have some great advantages, such as cost reduction. Let's imagine that we have a website in our stack that is making a lot of profit. We can profit a lot on this website. And of course, we can profit a lot on this because it has a lot of traffic. We can spread the traffic costs amongst all the websites on the same web server. And vice versa, if we have a single website that it's not making any profit at all, we won't have to dedicate container or a whole machine for it. It will just be hosted inside the same web server, sharing the costs with other services that are making the profit. It will be easy for us to monitoring a multi-tenant architecture. And that's because, imagine again, we have 1,000 different websites. On a single tenant architecture, we will have to monitor every single web server. And if we want to balance the load for some website, we have more than 1,000 web servers for 1,000 websites. And with a multi-tenant architecture, we actually have to monitor just one web server or two web servers if we want to balance the load amongst two web servers. So it's way easier to monitoring and to use something like New Relic or Sentry for analytic data on our server. It's monorepo friendly. By monorepo, I mean that we can write our code inside a monorepo where we have like a component library, maybe for the front end, utility functions library where we can write and share utility code that will be used on every single website. Because maybe, given that our website can share features, we want our developer experience to be as good as possible. So we want our code to be as modular as possible. And a monorepo makes it easy to reuse components and scripts. And also, we can have one pipeline to rule them all, meaning that if we have a bug on a button component, for example, once we fix that bug and we release a new release for a single website, we will be actually updating potentially many other websites with just one pipeline, which is pretty cool if you have a critical bug in production. So now we've talked about multi-tenancy, we've talked about monorepo and stuff like that, but we need to talk about Next.js, of course. So the first question is, why Next.js? Well, these are personal opinions, of course. Next.js is easy to use. I've played with Angular, I've played with Vue, and I loved every single JavaScript framework out there, but Next.js is my favorite by far. So again, this is a personal opinion, and it's okay if you do not agree with that. We all love React, just like before. React, it's really easy to use, it's widely used, and has a great community, which is my next point. Next.js has a no-song community, and we should take this in consideration when choosing the right framework for our front-end and back-end applications. Next.js has some incredible built-in features, such as automatic images optimization, meaning that if you host an image from your Next.js web server, it will automatically optimize it for serving over the web, over the internet, using next generation formats such as WebP and stuff like that, when it's supported, of course. It's also easy to onboard people because Next.js is widely used, React is widely used, so it's easy to take developers and make them productive in just a few days on our projects. So, starting from that, what is the problem? The main problem is Next.js does not support multi-tenancy natively. And I had a dream about my Next.js installation. If you know Next.js enough, you know that we have a pages directory, which is a default directory for every single Next.js installation. And every single JavaScript file that we write inside our pages directory will be a page. So for instance, if we create an index.js page, that will be used as a homepage for our website. If we create an about.js page, that will be the about page for our website. So the dream would be to have many different brands inside our pages, where every single directory that is linked to a brand will basically hold all the pages for that specific brand. For example, we have pages/comedycentral/index.js, and that index.js will be the homepage for Comedy Central. If we have mtv/about.js, that will be the about page for mtv.com. So that is the dream. But as we said before, this is not possible as for now with Next.js. So during my researches, we've taken into considerations many different approaches, starting from the most simple one and most horrible one, of course, and it's instance replication and reverse proxy altogether, meaning that we can have a big container, a Docker container, and we can create a different Next.js website for every single brand. We have dozens of different brands. So we would have to spawn a different web server for every single brand. We may have like Comedy Central on port 3000, ParamountNetwork.com on port 3001, Nickelodeon on port 3002, and then a reverse proxy mapping the incoming request. It says like, okay, this is a request to ComedyCentral.com and will be mapped to the web server running on port 3001. We have a request from ParamountNetwork.com. This will be mapped to the server running on the port 3002. As you can imagine, this is the worst solution possible because we can potentially have many different web servers running inside a single container. And I don't like that solution at all. We can do a sort of workaround with Kubernetes. Still not my favorite solution ever. And we can take the similar approach using a Kubernetes cluster. So we basically have every single web server running on a different pod and a reverse proxy inside our Kubernetes cluster mapping the domain name for the request to the specific pod. Yeah, that can scale a little better, but still not the perfect solution, in my opinion, of course. And here comes the third option, to move the reverse proxy at the web server level. And I need to talk about how I got into that solution. I started to think about how I used to make websites back in the high school, where I was using PHP and Apache and Adobe Dreamweaver. And every time you hit like a Command S, you open an FTP connection to the production server and you push the production code. Don't do that, please. Don't do that. I'm not doing that anymore, I promise. But I started to regret those days because it was way easier. But I started to think about how Apache is running the virtual host module and move that, transpile that into a JavaScript module that now it's called GrUSP. And GrUSP is an Express.js middleware for multi-tenant Next.js applications. It's free to use, it's open source, you can download and use it from github.com/MicheleRiva/GrUSP, and feel free to submit an issue if you find any, of course. With Next.js, we are actually able to realize, to make our dream come true. So we just have to create a custom server using Express.js and a .grubs.config.js file, which is the configuration file for our GrUSP application. So let's start from the custom server now. As you can see, this is a very basic Express.js server. So basically, we import Express, we import Next, and we follow everything that the official Next.js guide is asking us to do for creating a custom server. But as you can see, on line 15, we have a wildcard route. So every single route for that server will be served by the GrUSP middleware, where we pass the request, the response, the Next.js handle, and the Next.js application. And GrUSP will do the magic. And it will do that by using the GrUSP configuration file. The GrUSP configuration file is basically an object and can actually be an asynchronous function if you prefer. So you can take data from the database and stuff like that, where you have to create an array of tenants. Every single tenant has a name. As you can see, the first tenant is Comedy Central, and the second tenant is Paramount. And that name needs to be used, let me go back, as a folder name for our pages directory. So here we would have the Comedy Central tenant, the Paramount tenant, Nickelodeon, and MTV tenants. Let me go. Here we are. OK. And as you can see, we can also express which domains needs to be mapped to the right tenant and on which environment. And that's because, of course, when we want to run our application, we need to express, of course, the domain name that needs to be mapped. And locally, we can have like a regex for dev.everything.local.comedycentral.com. And on production, we will only reply with a Comedy Central page when we get hit by the comedycentral.com hostname. The same occurs for Paramount Network. When node-env variable, environment variable will be equal to development, we will be only serving local.paramountnetwork.com and the development domain for Comedy Central. Same for production, of course. That allows us to do something like that. So we have our pages directory. We have Comedy Central, which is the first tenant. We have the index.js file, which is the homepage for Comedy Central, and the shows.shows.js file, where shows, the last file, it's a wildcard route for every single show. So it's like a variable. So every time our first user asks, like, hey, let me see the homepage for Comedy Central, GrUSP will map the route to Comedy Central/index.js and will only render that page. When the user asks for South Park, GrUSP will be serving the pages /Comedy Central/shows/shows.js file for that user only. So when a second user comes and asks for, ParamountNetwork.com, well, at this point, GrUSP will be serving the Paramount/index.js file, and there's no way it will serve the Comedy Central one. And same, of course, if he wants to see Titanic from Paramount. But as you may be asking, every single website can have different features, different look and feel. And GrUSP allows us to use different technologies for every single website. So we could have like the first website using Chakra UI, the second website using Material UI, and one website using Sass, one website using Bootstrap. It's not a problem. We can do that. I'm not suggesting to do that because the developer experience will be really, really bad because it will become a bit slow because Next.js will have to use many different technologies and that slows down the process. But it's still possible. And we will see that during a little live demo that I will be doing later on. So let's see how to do that, how to create different layouts for our pages. and our websites. We have the _app.js file, which is like the entry point for every single page in Next.js, that it's common to all the pages for our web server. So we have like, we can use here the getInitialProps built-in method. And here, on line 24, as you can see, GrUSP is appending the tenant object to the context.request object. And tenant is basically the tenant configuration object that you've set inside your GrUSP configuration object. So for every single page, you will always know which is the tenant that is rendering that specific page. And we can pass that, that prop inside every single page on line 31, as you can see. And starting from there, we can import many different layouts, like Comedy Central layout, Paramount Network layout, Nickelodeon, and MTV layouts, wrap them into a map where every single property is the tenant name. And then on line 14, we can get the tenant layout from the map and apply that to our page, so that every time we render a page, we first wrap it into a specific layout. And we can do that with other context providers, such as Redux providers or GraphQL providers and stuff like that. We can completely do that. How does a layout look like? Let's see the Comedy Central one. In that example, the Comedy Central layout is using Chakra UI. So as you can see, we basically wrap the children component inside the Chakra provider. We use a menu component, which is common to all the pages for that layout. And every time we will render a page from Comedy Central, we will be rendering it through that layout. I have a suggestion for that. If you're interested in multi-tenancy Next.js, I have a great suggestion that can potentially save a lot of work, and it's to create a white label component library, so that you can use just one single technology for styling your pages, and you can make it more modular and themable, where you have the white label component library, let's say using styled components or emotions or whatever you want. And as you can see, we basically will have the same components on every website. We have the modal component, the button component, we will have the text component, and so on. And the difference is in the look and feel. So Comedy Central has a dark layout with yellow accent colors. Paramount Network has blue layout with dark blue accent colors. Nickelodeon has an orange background with yellow accent colors, and so on with all the other brands. So we just need to inject the theme, but the component library will be the same on every single website. And this is how a theme will look like. We have themes, which is an object where we have a list of properties where each property is a tenant name. So we have Comedy Central having a black background color, white text color, and Paramount Network having its own properties, and so on with all the other brands. So as you can see, if we go back to the _app.js file, we will be able to inject that theme inside our theme provider for every single page that it's running on Next.js. So speedy demo time. Yeah, let's hope it works. Let me show you something more practical. So I've prepared a little demo where we'll be creating two different websites. The first one will be English Setter Lovers, because I love English setters. It's my favorite dog breed. And Veggies, because I love ratatouille. It's my favorite meal. And so we have those two websites. And as you can see, this is the CRAB configuration, meaning that we have the development, the dev, domain, and the prod domain. So let's call this with their name. Okay. And let's go to the pages. We have the English Setter Lovers. As you can see, it's the same name that we expressed in the CRABS configurations. And Veggies name, which is the same name that we expressed in the CRABS configuration for that tenant. Veggies will have an index file an about file, and a blog. As you can see, it will print some posts. English sector lovers will be an index, will have, sorry, an index, and about, and a pictures pages. And let's see for a moment app, because we will be having different styles for our websites. We will have, let's go to layouts. We will have the Veggies layout that will be using Tailwind CSS, and English sector lovers, which will be using Chakra UI, as you can see here. So let's go to app.js. And as you can see, we are dynamically importing Veggies layout and English sector lovers layouts. So every time we get a request, we take the tenant name, we pass the tenant name to our page props, and then we get the full tenant layout, and we wrap our pages inside our tenant layout. Let's see if it works. Let's hope so. As you can see, the first warning we get is not env, it's undefined, and that's true. So we will be running the development domains, meaning that we will be running only the domains where the environment is development. Okay. Let's see if now it starts the server. And let's see for a moment. Okay, sorry. So here's our first website, the Veggies blog, and our second website, the English sector lovers blog. And okay, server has started. So we can also do something like that. If we go now on the Veggies layout in the index, we can take on the server side props the host name for the request. And then we can get a specific image depending on the host name. So if we call our web application like that, as you can see, we call local.cabbage. So we are rendering a cabbage. But we can also try with local.pumpkin, sorry. And as you can see, same website, different images. We can be more generic and do like local.veggies. And as you can see, we have some veggies. We can also go to the blog. And we have a list of posts, and go read our favorite post, as you can see here. And we can also run on the exact same web server. We can see all the pictures of beautiful setters. And here we are. So this is how multi-tenancy works in Next.js. Let me go back to the slides so we can proceed with our presentation. We've seen how Next.js works in a multi-tenant mode, but we also have some downsides. First of all, we need a custom server. Having a custom server means that we cannot deploy to Vercel. And Vercel is the platform that has been created for serving Next.js specifically. It's an awesome platform. So I highly suggest you to think if you really want to maintain a custom server before going into multi-tenancy in Next.js. There's no support for static site generation and incremental static regeneration. And that's because we are creating highly dynamic websites, and we are requiring get initial props at the app.js page level. So we are not able to create static site generation. Document and app.js files are the same for all the websites. So that's another problem. We need to keep that in consideration. But for the static site generation and incremental static regeneration, which are some killer features from Next.js, I have some suggestions. You can use CDNs. You can use Cloudflare, Akamai, or Fastly, or wherever you want for for caching every single page that you'd like to. So for example, if you get a request from Paramount Network, you can render the page, cache it inside Cloudflare, and the next time we will be calling that homepage for Paramount Network, we will be serving the cached version for our page. We can also do something like incremental static regeneration by purging the cache every time we ask for, we have some content change and we want to regenerate the page actually. So how does GrUSP scale? Well, it's basically just a common Express.js server. So as long as you maintain some best practice, you will be able to scale your Express.js server with ease. Now, what are the GrUSP use cases? First of all, thinking about creative agencies. Creative agencies can produce many different websites with common features, and it could make sense for people, working at those agencies to make code more modular possible and cut the costs of such products. Consultancy companies can also be another great use cases, because consultancy companies are typically creating many different websites, but again, they want to share as much code as possible. And big corporates, just like Viacom CBS, we want our code to be as modular as possible. And software as a service products, where every single customer can have its own custom domain, or stuff like that. We can do that using Next.js and using multi-tenancy. But for now, we've only seen Express.js. Is there any good alternative? Yeah, there is. There is Fastify, which is the future of Node.js web servers, in my opinion, again. We can do multi-tenancy with Fastify and Next.js, of course. Let me show you. This is taken from the official Fastify Next.js documentation. As you can see, we create a server, we register the Fastify Next.js application, and then every time we hit like the /hello route, that route will be served by Next.js, as you can see on line 8. So we need to create a pages /hello.js file that will render that specific page. And this is an example of multi-tenancy. Again, it's not following any best practice. It's just to show you how it works. And this is what GrUSP is doing under the hood, of course. But if the request hostname for hello is paramountnetwork.com, we will be rendering the paramount/hello page. If the hostname is mtv.com, then we will be rendering the mtv/hello page. In all the other cases, we will be rendering just the error page, a very generic error page. So, some final tips. First, always ask yourself if you do really need it. You should keep your architecture simple. And multi-tenancy is good for large-scale projects. So if you really want to create many different websites, I would say dozens or hundreds of different websites, you can do that using multi-tenancy. But in all the other cases, please ask yourself if it's fitting your purposes. And also, multi-tenancy is good if you, of course, that kind of multi-tenancy with Next.js is good if you want to maintain many different websites with similar features, similar look and feel, and stuff like that. And also make sure that you can actually share code amongst all your projects. Otherwise, it makes no sense. And think template-based. Use a white label system. This is my strongest suggestion for today. And create reusable templates so that you can use like error page that is common to all the different websites, all the different tenants. Use templates that can be shared between all the tenants. Then make it stateless. As I said before, that solution will scale incredibly well. And that's because Express.js itself is scaling well. Node.js, it's good at serving websites. But at a certain point, if you are serving like thousands of different websites, you will need to scale horizontally. And load balancers make it makes it hard to use sessions and stuff like that. So use cookies, don't use sessions, make it stateless so that if the next request comes to another server, we will be still able to serve the correct experience to our user. So that was all. Thank you so much for following me. Here we are, some contacts. If you want to get in touch, please feel free to write to me. If you want to see something about the book, here are the links. And if you want to learn more about ViconCBS and what we are doing and what positions are open, please feel free to reach out, because we have some interesting challenges, such as supporting 35 languages, more than 250 websites, 31 brands, and a continuous integration pipeline with more than 10 deployments per day. So it's really, really challenging, really interesting. And yeah, that's all. See you later, and feel free to chat with me if you want.
I was muted. Okay, sorry.
I was scared.
I keep talking. Yeah. So first of all, Michele, thank you very much for the great talk. Of course, it has to happen in the end. So folks, please don't forget to ask your questions in the chat and also in the dedicated Q&A session. And please let me just start with the fact that I think it's really, really amazing that this thing which you just showed us is actually an open source library on the NPM, so anybody can just use it, right? So it's not just like, oh, like, we do this something like internally, but like you can just grab it today and just get productive like straight ahead. So I think that's really, really amazing. Besides that, I mean, like, I had prepared a couple of questions. I was following your talk, but you kind of managed to answer at least some of them in these final remarks. For example, about like, yeah, guys, go stateless, because when you start scaling and you have like this load balancer and you get to these different instances. But then I would still maybe have like a sub question there, which is when you mention like this kind of pages like Comedy Central and whatever, as far as I understand, those are the pages where you sometimes have to log in to be able to view some content, right? So this has to be then managed. So is there like some implications when using GrUSP like together, let's say with cookies, or it just works the same way as it would always? So
No, it's the same. It's the same as you always did. As you always did. That makes no difference. My point was don't use sessions, because if you want to scale horizontally, and if you have a multi-tenant application, you're likely to scale horizontally, it will be hard to keep the session synced for all the websites. So if you're using stateless cookies, that would be really easier for you to handle horizontal scalability.
Definitely makes sense. Another question, which may be like just as a like explainer, so I don't really have much first-hand experience with Next.js, so maybe this doesn't really make sense, but still, like, first thing which popped to my mind is like, let's say we have like all these tenants there, like for all these sub-products or sub-brands, and most likely some of them will have more active development than the other as the time passes on, right? So like you focus on one, the another one has a big release or like a big show coming or something, so there is like more work on the other one. But because it's all in the single repository, whenever you change any part, you still kind of have to rebuild the whole thing, or not really? What are the implications like in a real life project in terms of like a build time?
Yeah, of course, it depends on the pipeline you have. Of course, if you need to add a new page on a specific brand, you need to rebuild everything from scratch. And that's obvious because you have to rebuild Next.js itself. So that's a potential issue, but this is really common in big corporates. And that's why I'm saying that you should ask yourself if you really need multi-tenancy. That makes sense if you have a product that needs to scale with many different tenants. And at this point, you will likely have many different deployments per day, because you will be inside a monorepo. Otherwise, it could make no sense. You will be inside a monorepo. You will have many different tenants. You will have many security patches to send to production. And of course, you want to rebuild everything for every single website every time. And so, yeah, that slows down a bit the whole process, but makes you a bit more secure.
Secure and efficient, maybe like efficient in that way, like rolling it out for all of them together and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right? So you cannot
absolutely.
really forget someone which are like less active and stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But would you share with us, like, at least roughly, like, what's the time, like, in your real life project? Like, how long does it take? Because, like, just to have like a rough estimate, because I cannot imagine, is it like minute? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 30 seconds?
Well, I cannot share this information about VacancyBS, of course, because it's private. But it really depends on the quality of your pipeline, because you have to think about the build process, the end-to-end test process, the unit test process, and stuff like that. So I would say at least 1 hour, in my opinion. It would take like 1 hour to go to production, and you will have like a queue of deployments for the whole day. That's for sure. If you are scaling a product at this level, that's for sure you will have like 1 hour pipeline. But again, this is not the case for VacancyBS, because we have we are not using crabs at this moment. We will be in the future, maybe. We are investigating. So I will tell you in the future how is the pipeline going. But in my opinion, yeah, no problem. In my opinion, it would be around 1 hour per deployment.
I mean, as you mentioned, it like kind of really makes sense to also consider like the pipeline quality. So of course, if you just have like some small smoke test, then it will be much faster if you are doing like some proper testing and you can really say that you are sure about what you are deploying to the production. So most likely the time is not like the only criterion. I was just thinking like in that context of rebuilding all the stuff, but I mean, of course, it also depends how much resources you kind of throw at the pipeline. So then it, of course, can speed up and stuff like that. But yeah, no, definitely makes sense. Besides that, we have here a question in terms of like if you could clarify a bit more about how to implement like the static site generations and incremental static site regeneration, at least some pointers, because you kind of started around that, but then we moved on with the other content, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, static site generation and incremental static regeneration for the moment are not supported in crabs and are not supported for any single Next.js website that is using get initial props on the app.js file. And that's because we are asking Next.js to inject some server-side data to our pages before we render them. So it is not possible to do that statically. We need to do that dynamically. So my suggestion would be to get a cache, just like Akamai, for example. So every time we hit a new route, we cache the resulting HTML. And from that point going on, we will be serving the cached version every time we get a hit on that specific page. We can mimic incremental static regeneration by purging the cache. So new content comes, the user still sees the old version, right? We can purge the cache for that specific page every time we create new content, so that we will force the cache to be invalid and regenerate the whole page. So that's how you can achieve something like static site generation and incremental static regeneration. They are not the same things, but the result, it's quite the same, of course.
Yeah, for the end user, that's what matters then in the end, right? So that's
exactly.
Correct. Because in the end, it's always, of course, about the end user. So, folks, how about some more questions? And besides that, like, I don't know if I caught it correctly, but like in the beginning, you were speaking that you are currently writing book. So is there like some ETA, like when it will be out? Well,
yeah.
You have like a lot of experience with Next.js, so you have a lot to share, right? So
yeah. I gotta say, I got an incredible opportunity at VacancyBS to study Next.js in depth. So I decided to write a book. I got in contact with Packet Publishing, which is a very prolific, publishing company. And they asked me to write a book about Next.js. It will be published by the end of the year. And it will cover some real-world experiments. For example, e-commerces with Next.js, and Multi-Tenant Next.js in depth, of course, and stuff like that. So if you're interested in this book, you can pre-order it, but also make sure to read it from the start, because we will see performance tips, SEO tips, and everything that comes around with Next.js. So it will be a really in-depth book about Next.js.
Yeah, it's I think it's like always definitely cool when people are like willing to put in all this effort, because like I'm pretty well aware of that, like writing a book is a not like an easy thing to do. Like it's a major project, and then people who basically get all this real life experience on their day job, which may be like really special compared to like just building some smaller website. Like when you are working at that scale, and then you get these kind of different experiences, and then willingness to put in all this time to share it with everybody else at the end of the day, so that you can cut their learning curve, and then they can not repeat the mistakes from which you already learned. That's always like a very nice thing. So folks, do not hesitate and like check it out. Most likely there will be a link in the presentation or somewhere. There was already, right? So this will be all shared then after the conference, so go and check that out. And if we do not have any more questions, then I would like to thank you very much for the amazing talk again. And wish you a great day, and hopefully to see you at the next edition of the JSday Italy, maybe next year or maybe in person. Let's see. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you again. It has been an honor to be here. Really hope to see you in person next time. See you all in person next time. Really looking forward for the next edition.
Ciao,
Thank you again.
Michele.
Thank you. Bye.